Hei og velkommen tilbake til Filmprat fra filmfestivalen i Tromsø. Mitt navn Karsten Meinik, jeg redaktør for filmtidsskriftet Montage, og har gleden av å være tilbake her på scenen for å snakke med en av årets festivalgjester. Og vi skal snakke med en besøkende filmskaper fra et annet land, så da skal jeg bytte over til engelsk. And with English, possibly a little broken, I'll try to lead the conversation with you, Mr. Levan Koguashvili. Welcome very much to Tromsø.
Thank you very much.
You are here with your film Brighton 4th, and you are from Georgia, and the film takes place both in Georgia and in a part of New York. Is it Brighton Beach or those areas around? So to anyone who's seen the film at the festival or might have checked out the trailer, they know that the story, to just describe it quite simply, is about an old man who travels from Georgia to his younger son who's living in New York. And this premise takes us into both cultural aspects to being from Georgia and all these traditions that you want to keep alive when you live in another country, but also the modernity and the promise of a dream maybe that might be fulfilled in a country like America. Mm-hmm. And that is like an age-old story, I feel like, the dream of something in America in a way. But I think your film also shows us a little bit the backside of that medallion in a way. Could you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this story and where it came from for you as a writer and filmmaker?
Story started during my student years at New York University. I studied there, filmmaking, and I was making my films mostly about immigrants, Georgian immigrants. When I arrived in New York, it was time when Georgian immigration was very active. So people were leaving Georgia, looking for better life in America, and they were coming mostly on tourist visas, overstaying these visas and staying illegally in America, trying to find some jobs. So we're talking about mostly illegal immigration, and which was very interesting phenomena in a way, because it was related with no papers, almost no English in the beginning. And when you have this, and with a very specific sense of own cultural identity, and when you place such people in a country without papers and legal, you have conflict, natural conflict. And for me as a filmmaker, it was very interesting to see what was happening, and now it was a very rich soil, for stories and characters. And
the period when you stayed in New York, was it the early 2000s or mid-2000s?
I came to 2002.
And did you arrive with already you finished some education, or were you just beginning as a filmmaker then? What time in your life when you moved to New York?
So I had a long process of studying, I would say. I first went to the theater school in Tbilisi in 1990. But it lasted only 1 year because then the civil war started 1 year later, and our school was right in the center of Tbilisi, and the tanks were outside of my institute 1 year after I entered the school. So it was done with education there. Then there was a couple of years of me being a journalist. I wanted to be a war reporter. I did a little bit of that, but mostly I stayed in Tbilisi, which was pretty much like a war zone itself. So, but it was amazingly interesting time also as experience of, and I think this background gave me a lot for the future filmmaking mentality, I would say. And then there was a situation at some point that I liked being a journalist very much, but I understood that's not what I want to do all my life. And film was in my mind again. So, and the only school I could go at that time was Russian film school, VGIK, so famous, legendary film school from Soviet times. So I entered it in 1995. And studied there 1999. So then I came back home, and then so there was a chance to go to New York a couple of years later. So there's Moscow, Tbilisi a little bit, then Moscow big time, and then the main education was still in New York.
Because it's interesting, and I felt like I wanted to ask you, both because I think the audience here might not know you that well, but after watching one of your films, we are always getting curious on learning about new filmmakers. But it's so many breaking points in big political stuff at the same time as this period in your life. Like Soviet Union breaks up. I don't know how a film school in Moscow is like in the mid-1990s after everything that's happened. New York hit by terror attacks in 2001. You arrived there a year later. And all this tumultuous stuff, it creates, of course, scenes of big dramatic things, and you becoming a storyteller. And your first fiction feature film, 2010, Street Days, I've seen it, and it's a really interesting portrait of Tbilisi, I guess. But now in your most recent film, you're back in New York, looking at these immigrants and these, friendships and all these ties between the people there. How did you make that choice early in your career? What story to tell? To return back to Tbilisi, to stay in New York and maybe make one of those stories? And what made you choose?
Yeah.
In which way?
Very often, the circumstances they kind of dictate what you're gonna do. Because this film, I thought it's gonna be my debut, Brighton.
This one, yeah.
Yes, because we actually started working on a script, collecting materials when I was at film school in New York.
So like 15 years ago.
Yeah. So and because that's when because I made a couple of films there. I made a short film called The Debt, which went to Sundance. And after Sundance, there was a chance. I felt that there was a chance to offer the script to some New York producers. And I basically, this is a time when I started spending lots of time in Brighton Beach, because it's a so-called Russian neighborhood in Brooklyn. But nowadays it's inhabited by not only Russians but pretty much by lots of immigrants from ex-Soviet Soviet Union. So, and I started hanging out there a lot and collecting stories, like working as a journalist basically, but listening, meeting people, listening to their stories, taking pictures.
Drinking tea, I'm sure.
Yeah, drinking tea, not only tea, any other liquids. And it was amazing time, and I was almost ready to start writing a script, and then I was offered to do a story about junkie in Tbilisi. I received this phone call from Tbilisi, and I had this dilemma: should I stay in New York and try to make my first movie here, or should I go back home? And it was a tough decision. So, and I went back home and made Street Days. Then I made another movie, then another movie. So I almost forgot about Brighton, because it was already past, not so much relevant anymore, I would say. But then again, another producer who wanted to work with me, he said that maybe he knew about this. Brooklyn story about
maybe the time was right.
So he told me, let's do it, and I'll probably try to raise some money. So I was hesitant in the beginning, but then I thought, why not? When else I'll have a chance to make a movie in New York. So,
but I find it really interesting. Even though I haven't seen all of your films, I do think that it's interesting to talk a little bit about how you approach filmmaking, kind of both stylistically and thematically, because as you say, you come from journalism, and like in Street Days, there's this streak of, it has an element to me of the early, or the approach of the early neorealists in a way, that there's this, and also Robert Bresson, just like very precise, direct filmmaking, but always concentrated on the characters and how they move through their dilemmas or the drama that's there. And you never, stretch the canvas too big to include all of Georgia or all of political things. But there's these small scenes that illustrate for us, corruption or class or economics and everything. And in a way, in Brighton 4th, even though your style is changed a little bit, maybe, I don't know if it's budget questions or just filming in America, and maybe the landscapes are a little different, but you still seem to be very attentive to rooms, people moving in closed spaces, how we look to each other for solutions, finding out how can I ask my friend for this service. Well, there's a service coming back. I have to move this. There's some similarities there, and I'm sure probably there's some traits in your films in between as well. When you were making your first film, did you think a lot about style and what kind of filmmaker you were going to be, or did it just fall natural to you to do that film in that way?
I think the main decision, first of all, neorealism, I think, is something which I think where my heart is deeply rooted, emotionally. I think nothing better was made in cinemas than neorealism, and all the great movies are coming in a way from there, also Jean Vigo, which is, but it's this poetry of realism, of everyday realism, but very in a poetic way. So to start with, On the other hand, I think the main decision in terms of creative approach to the material was a script. I mean, is script structured or not? You know, is it just observation or it's construction? And is it a conflict? Because conflict is something which holds the film together, you know, and the story. So the main decision and creative decisions was there. Other rest is like it's a filmmaking, you know, and how you choose actors. But when you have this kind of story, it helps you to, and it's like your decision, you know, you're making like just freestyle, observational, you know, this kind of just assembly of interesting scenes, or you have a structure, you know. This is, I think, the biggest decision, and so far, I think I stayed with story. This is the biggest decision. Rest is, you know, comes from locations, and I work a lot with like non-professional actors.
I was going to ask about that also, because as a spectator to Georgian cinema, I'm not able to connect with actors' fame. You know, are they in TV shows, in theater? I wouldn't know, but in a way, I just sense from your filmmaking that there's this natural element of the way they behave, the way they act. I'm sure some of them are professional, but to talk about Brighton 4th in this aspect, it is interesting to me that these people are also in a strange land in a way. I mean, acting is one thing, you know, just looking at the text and playing, but it also appearing in the setting of America and being like, could you talk a little bit about that? Did you cast people from the community of Georgian people living in America, or did you bring a lot of actors from Georgia? How was that process on that film?
Yeah, so on Brighton, we had the main guy. The biggest thing was to choose the main guy.
The wrestler.
And he's a real wrestler.
Yeah, he had to be in a way. It was very believable. And is that real of footage from his younger years?
Yes.
That's him?
Yes, that's him.
Okay.
He was two-time Olympic champion.
Wow, okay.
So he's legendary sportsman.
Okay, cool.
So, and having him was amazing luck. Also his son is an actor. He studied directing, but he was in a couple of movies, so he had acting experience. Russian girl, she's famous Russian actress, Nadia Mikhalkova, and there are a couple of other actors. You know, of course, we have the main guy, who is Kahi Kavsadze, whom we dedicate the movie. So, and in New York, but we brought 3 or 4 people from Georgia to New York, because we started shooting in Georgia. So the first scenes were shot in Georgia. Rest, of course, we found in America. We were limited with both financially, both resource-wise, to find professional actors. And also, I really never cared about are they professional or not, because if a person has an interesting face and he can act, why not? You know, it's better. You know, in a way, you have some limitations, but we have a couple of actors in whom we found in New York, the 2 female characters. There was this kind of theater, kind of non-professional theater in New York of Georgian immigrants.
Right,
that's
cool.
where I found. So, and then we have number of just interesting characters, like say, the guys who are gambling, criminals. Right. They used to be real criminals in the real life. Yeah. Most of them served many years in jail. So I found them in New York, met them, and they were extremely helpful. They were in the movie. So
yeah, they bring some authenticity to that part of the story, and I love those scenes where you are suddenly out of the cramped spaces and you're at the beach, you're at this restaurant, and you know, to tie also together these themes like the father and the son here. It's a very strong current through storytelling in general, I guess. Daughters, mothers, fathers, you know, all that bond between family generations. But I never get tired of watching those kinds of stories, because I think it's one of those elements where we all, even where we are from, nations, language, religion, we can all attach ourselves. And I felt your film has many qualities, but to me the strongest one was how easy I could attach without being from Georgia, or, you know, I just feel like that it was very moving to me how that father had this silent kind of acceptance of all the mistakes or the errors of the son, and he just wanted to find a way to contribute without being too much of a dramatic father figure, because we also see that a lot in drama, you know. It's sometimes too written, that people are in conflict, that's always expressed with words and fights, but here the conflict is just like partly a little bit about fate, that he accepts that this is the situation, how can I help? And I really loved how you gave that like a silent treatment. What was it like for you to work with this theme? Is that father-son bond something that you're interested in other works of you've made, or was this the first film where you treated that theme?
It was something coming from the real life in the first place.
Yeah.
So I met real father in Brooklyn while doing researches in Brighton Beach. And he came to rescue his son, who had another addiction. He was drug addict.
All right.
And so he came all the way from Georgia to save his son. So it was the inspiration.
Right.
So it started from there. As in terms of how we presented this relationship, and as you mentioned, that we were thinking about some kind of conflict also. Eventually, think about it, you know. But pretty much, as a director, you have to consider how actors behave, you know, and especially when you're working with non-professional actors who have their limitations. And for sure, this guy had his limitations, but at the same time, you understand the limitation is sometimes becomes a style, you know. And we said, maybe, hey, he's like this guy who doesn't talk too much at all, you know, and just does things, you know. He accepts, so his strength is in his silence.
Yes.
And his more is less and laconic way of treating his son may be stronger in a way, so, and more original, you know. So, and also it's something about ethics of wrestlers. You know, wrestlers we're talking about strong guys who don't show up their strengths, you know, because real strong guys, they're humble and modest, you know. Yeah. So this is something which, when you start hanging out with the wrestlers, you feel it, you know, how these huge guys who they think they can destroy you, simple in a way are they in their everyday relationship, you know. So and you understand this is something about ethics of. Yeah.
But I really like that part. I mean, the silence of this character became a dramatic engine, because we are, of course, very interested to know how is he going to react to this situation, or what is the solution he's searching for. He's not telling us, you know. And it's strange how used we are to cinema that explains and tells us, and it might be great films, but it's still quite understandable, and you leave the film feeling, yeah, I know everything. And of course you give us solutions to this story by the end of Brighton 4th, but I still feel like that quality is something that made it very much emotional for me, because I get invested, I kind of lean in and try to figure it out. Even though it's not a mystery, it's still an emotional mystery. And another aspect that I really liked, and I'm curious to hear you talk about, is how much of specific cultural stuff you feel natural to introduce. Like, for a Georgian audience, a lot in this film they can read immediately, but for an international audience, you might think that you want to explain the cheese, for example, but you don't. You just, first you buy some cheese in Georgia, and it's like, I'm not thinking much about it. And then there's the packing of the cheese, the tasting of the cheese, and then suddenly you realize he's going to bring the cheese. And that's when we realize he's going to America. And when you get to America, this cheese is like this magic cultural, you know, it's like a heart he brings out of his suitcase, and all the other people from Georgia are just like, yes, let's taste, and suddenly they're back home. And then I realized that's a very important part of your storytelling, but you're keeping it kind of like, it's almost like we don't notice it until it probably becomes very important. Same with singing. We know from our lives that even if it's Christmas here in Norway, like we all know the same songs, and if we sing them together, it can be abrupt during dinner. But in films, we're not used to characters just suddenly starting to sing something, and everyone knows the song, and then suddenly they sing, and this happens in musicals. That's a genre. But I love how you just like let your characters suddenly sing something, and as your film progresses, we realize it's a very important thing, and it becomes like a whole, you know, the whole way you close out the film, it becomes a part of that emotional storytelling. Talk a little bit about these elements and how important it is for you as a filmmaker to introduce these cultural specific things?
It's culture, something which you have it or not. If you have it, it shows up in you, if you want or not. I feel very much Georgian director. Its culture is a very strong part of me. Otherwise, I would have stayed in New York and tried to become American filmmaker. My choice was to go back in Georgia, and though I love American cinema, but to try to do my stories, with the consideration of experience which I got in New York, invaluable experience, So that's what, speaking about culture. As for cheese and stuff, usually two things. One, it's everything. I've been living away from Georgia for many years, and I don't remember how many times I took my cheese or someone's cheese to different countries in the world. So it's something and it's funny,
Yeah.
Plus it's props, and you need props in movies. That's how you tell stories, In good movies, you tell stories with props, not with words.
The cheese is so useful in your film. So many scenes you can bring it on and something happens.
Yes, it's about comedy.
Yep.
It's about props, because props are visual. It's not about verbal, because you don't remember verbals. You don't remember dialogues.
No.
In movies. You remember what you see.
Yeah.
So something coming from Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, I think, is the basement of cinema. So you need the props for that, right? As for singing, it's pretty much also something, as you said, it's also kind of element of the plot, because you need to explain why we have the singing in the finale, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of introducing, but it's also part of behavior. And I grew up in a family, and my family didn't have to do anything with arts. My father was a doctor, and my mother was a teacher of biology, of physiology. But in our family, people would sing very often, during the big gatherings. So it was part of life. And Georgians had these kind of gatherings all the time, 20, 30 people drinking wine, saying toasts. So I grew up as a kid watching people behaving like this. It became my... Then there was 90s. Then everything stopped, and people, it was tough time. Not so much thinking.
National identity crisis.
Not only it was just economical crisis, political crisis, war. There's no electricity. And now it's a different culture. We have now different generations who are interested in just sitting and looking into a smartphone and singing. So. As a person being on the border of two generations, I remember something which I'm trying to show now, but
I'm sure there's some Georgian folk songs on TikTok. Someone somewhere singing.
Definitely.
But it's also in street days. I was just going to mention it. There's quite a few scenes where, to me, for no dramatic reason, there's songs and singing that goes in, and by the end of the film, outside of that school, there's the song, and I'm thinking, again. So but it's beautiful. I think it's a nice thing. But I'm looking at I'm finding out you as a filmmaker. What's the auteur doing, and I think it's quite central to not huge choices you make, but how you kind of enriching your film with these elements.
Yes. And also it's about editing as well. Sometimes you have one ending in the script, but then you edit and you say, let's finish with the song. So
it goes out that's a good solution. I said, as we started out talking, that it's nice for the audience here in Tromsø to get to know you a little better. We hope, of course, that you would, after this first visit, come and return with future projects that you make, and we can see your films here again. And it's always, to me, quite interesting to hear a little bit about, just like other films and filmmakers that you're inspired by. Because we need always good advice on filmmakers to check out and films to watch. And I've seen a few other Georgian films this last decade, and I think they're quite good. There was a film called The Beginning just a couple of years ago, very good. Another one, I don't remember the title, but it feels like you're making quite a lot of good films in Georgia now. You have a rich film history as well, but to you personally, is there something other films from Georgia that you would like to recommend? Other filmmakers we should check out? And just for you personally, what inspires you? Who are your favorites?
Good question. So we had this, as you mentioned, very strong history of filmmaking, starting from 20s.
Yeah.
Even the first movie was made, I think, 1910 or 12, so it was documentary.
Yeah, even in the silent film age,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had like a lot. Yeah.
Silent film, we have amazing
Yeah.
film called Jim Schwante. I would recommend everyone to watch it. This is the film made by the same guy who made Cranes Are Flying.
Yeah.
You know this film,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's his documentary, poetic documentary about the mountainous region in
But he was a
Georgia.
young filmmaker then.
He
I
was in
guess.
20s.
Yeah.
So amazing film.
Yeah.
And I mean, the number of very strong. Then there was a renaissance of Georgian cinema 60s, like everywhere, in many countries. So the Georgian new wave, amazing, and then of course there was a big gap in 90s. Still films were being produced, but very few. So and then the 2000, I think I was and with my colleagues were the first generation of after this big gap who came, who managed to get some education in different countries. Some of them in Germany, some of them still in Georgia, like me as in New York. So it was a new generation of filmmakers coming with urgency to tell stories, I would say, because so many things happened in our life and biographies. You know, so we witnessed so many things that there was this, really necessity to express it somehow. I think it very much dictated and helped us to figure out why we want to make movies.
Yeah,
you know? So and its process is now is continuing, and new names are coming, and and the number of very interesting, as you mentioned, directors. I think the Nana Ektimishvili is Nana and Simone. They work as a couple. She's a very interesting filmmaker. I like a lot Lashat Skvitinidze. He is a young Georgian director who made called I Am Beso, and now he's working on the second film. So they're interesting documentary filmmakers, you know. So there are names, you know, and definitely someone to watch. And
we should keep watching and looking out for them.
Yeah.
And just to finish off, then, who are your filmmaking heroes from film history? I know you mentioned a few of them just before we started. If you look to inspiration for yourself, checking out some problem you have in your filmmaking, who do you turn to in film history to think, okay, I need some inspiration, I need like a...
it's of course, it's crazy to say, but as I said, neorealism is a kind of basement of my ideology as a filmmaker, my approach to the filmmaking, something about irony and humor, and which you try to tell stories, even the most dramatic ones. I think this quality of having a little bit of humor is important, and that's what I see in the greatest films, we just talked about neorealism, we talked about Jean Vigo, right, Atalanta, which is amazingly poetic film, but with lots of humor, right? But I don't know, we just before we started the conversation, we mentioned Robert Altman and John Cassavetes, two of my heroes, and but of course Scorsese is, because whenever I watch Casino, I don't know how many times I watched Casino in my life,
It's always interesting with Casino because Scorsese has made so many, major masterpieces that everyone mentions, but it's Casino. Someone said there's a test, like if ever Casino is on TV and you approach it, can you turn it off?
No.
No,
that's absolutely. I can turn off Godfather, number 1 and number 2. I can turn off Casino for sure. It's such a celebration of filmmaking, in every aspect. Acting, camera movement, costumes, music. It's a celebration. Mean Streets is my favorite.
It's good as well.
Oh my God! So I don't know. It's so many things. But again, when we go back to Fellini and Godard and
the big,
big
names.
What can we?
No. I'm looking at the clock and I see we are exactly hitting the 30-minute mark. This is our limited time, and it feels like we could now continue being like film nerds for 2 more hours. But I guess we have to finish off. And Levan, thank you so much for coming to this conversation. As I said, filmmakers that we get to learn here in Tromsø at the festival, we always hope that you want to return. And for future projects, have in mind that there's this warm but a little bit cold festival in Norway in January that wants to welcome you back.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's watching. We'll be back with more talks at the end of the week. Bye-bye.